The use by law enforcement agencies of disinformation, undercover agents, provocateurs, harassment, and informants did not begin with the war against the Black Panther Party. Repression based on race, religion, and radicalism has a long history in the United States, and the tactics and strategies used against the Black Panther Party have been employed by the government since the nation's founding. This chapter will briefly outline examples of government repression and disregard for constitutional rights of dissident groups in America since the turn of the century. A. The Haymarket Incident. B. Domestic intelligence from 1908 to 1936. C. Post-war domestic intelligence. D. The repression of Black America. E. United Farm Workers. F. American Indian Movement. The formation and purpose of the party. What makes it different? Ideology of revolutionary intercommunalism. Strategy for building community institutions. The survival programs. The patrols. The democratic reforms by the party to build community institutions. Use of democratic reforms by the party to build community institutions. Response of the government to the Black Panther Party. The administration's propaganda war against the Panthers, making the political criminal. Let's start here. Upon Richard Nixon's election as president in 1968, the administration addressed itself, in the words of former White House counsel John Dean, to the matter of how we can maximize the fact of our incumbency in dealing with persons known to be active in their opposition to our administration. Stated a bit more bluntly, how can we use the available federal machinery to screw our political enemies? A White House enemies list was drawn up by officials of the Nixon administration. In its original form, this list contained the names of only a few minor political parties or organizations, among them the Panthers, whom the administration linked with Huey Newton and George Wallace of the American Independent Party. Interestingly, though their expressed ideologies were quite opposite, both organizations shared the common feature of having strong grassroots support and active involvement by their members, in contrast to the established Democratic and Republican parties. The enemies list was then incorporated into a detailed plan, commonly known as the Houston Plan, after its White House designated coordinator, Tom Charles Houston. This plan was approved in 1970 by the former director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, in cooperation with the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the National Security Agency. It advocated blanket presidential authorization for such practices as wiretapping, mail covers, and black bag jobs or break-ins. Its main purported function was to improve interagency cooperation among the major intelligence agencies. Although this proposed plan was first approved but allegedly later disapproved by President Nixon because J. Edgar Hoover decided not to continue to cooperate, the tactics advocated had already been employed by various federal agencies, particularly the FBI, against the Panthers. Just why the FBI and other federal law enforcement agencies focused early on the party as an enemy of the organization is not difficult to understand. At the start of World War II, President Roosevelt directed the Bureau to refocus its resources on priorities it had purportedly given up in 1924. The investigation of political organizations and affiliations. Distinctions between foreign espionage and domestic dissident groups became blurred during the height of the war. In fact, vigilance and caution grew into xenophobia and distrust of anyone who veered noticeably from the political mainstream. The Cold War followed with President Truman's establishment of the Federal Employee Loyalty Program. The Bureau, having built up a large contingent of agents to guard the nation's internal security, channeled them into loyalty security investigations. Thus, the FBI took on officially the role of a kind of ideological security police, an arbiter of what was inside the boundaries of legitimate political discourse and what was outside. In the absence of any effective challenge to this role, the Bureau continued essentially unabated. Not surprisingly, when the Panthers became publicly visible in 1967 and 68, the FBI felt justified, if not compelled, to devote their full panoply of resources to investigating the organization. In part, this was in response to the Black Panther Party's ideology. As the chief of the FBI's counterintelligence program admitted in describing the genesis of the program within the Bureau that concentrated on the Panthers, we were trying first to develop intelligence so we would know what they were doing, and second, to contain the threat, to stop the spread of communism and stop the effectiveness of the Communist Party as a vehicle of Soviet intelligence, propaganda, and agitation. A more flamboyant assessment was provided by Edward Miller, former assistant director of the FBI in charge of the intelligence division upon his retirement in 1974. Rome lasted for 600 years, and we are just coming on to our 200th. That doesn't mean that we have 400 to go. We have to step back and look at ourselves protectively. How much of this dissent and revolution talk can we really stand in a healthy country? Revolutions always start in a small way. Economic conditions are bad, credibility of the government low. These are the things that the homegrown revolutionary is monitoring very closely. The FBI's attention must be focused on these various situations. If it weren't, the Bureau wouldn't be doing its job for the American people. The American people don't want to have to fool around with this kind of thing and worry about it. They don't want to have to worry about the security of their country. We must be able to find out what stage the revolution is in. The FBI was also aware of and disturbed by the Panthers' efforts to build community institutions. Indeed, the one survival program that seemed most laudatory, that of providing free breakfast to children, was pinpointed by J. Edgar Hoover as the real long-range threat to American society. The ostensible reason for this was that children participating in the program were being propagandized, which simply meant they were taught ideas. Or an ideology that the FBI and Hoover disliked. Yet Hoover was not so naive as to believe an overt ideological war was any longer sufficient to garner the support of non-interference necessary for the Bureau to destroy the Panthers. A better rationale or cover for the public would have to be employed. This new cover for secret police operations was, as the Houston Plan suggested, a crusade against criminals and terrorists. Now, the administration would fight crime, not ideologies. This technique for destroying controversial political organizations is, of course, not new. History should teach us that in times of high emotional excitement, minority parties and groups which advocate extremely unpopular social or governmental innovations will always be typed as criminal gangs, and attempts will always be made to drive them out. Internal FBI and other police agency documents make clear that this objective of pinning the label criminal on the Black Panther Party and its leaders, and trying to link criminal activity to the party's efforts at getting support for various survival programs. A 1974 memorandum to the director of the FBI from the special agent in charge of the San Francisco office stated that the local FBI office has continued to follow Newton's and his associates' activities. Primarily, the office has been pursuing Hobbs Act and or ITAR extortion cases on Newton and or his associates. Although investigations to date, including contacts with other law enforcement agencies, has failed to develop information indicating that Newton and his associates are extorting funds from businesses, This office is of the opinion that Newton is or has been extorting funds from legitimate businesses. In addition to the contacts noted above, the alcohol, tobacco, tax, and firearms section of the Department of Justice in Oakland, California, the Oakland Police Department, the Berkeley Police Department, and various informants, the San Francisco office is selectively contacting pimps and narcotics pushers in the Oakland area in an attempt to develop further intelligence and positive information concerning possible federal violations on the part of Newton and his associates. This matter will continue to receive vigorous investigative attention. Interestingly, the Bureau and others seem to feel that any contribution from a business, whether considered legitimate or not, to the Black Panther survival programs could not be voluntary. It would have to come from extortion. Despite a failure to obtain any evidence of extortion, the Bureau continued to hold the opinion that it took place and to try to develop information for a Hobbs Act prosecution. In 1973, for instance, the Assistant Attorney General who figured prominently in the Watergate investigations, Henry E. Peterson, wrote the acting director of the FBI regarding Newton and the Black Panther Party. During the course of filming a movie in Oakland, California, Harvey Bernhard, a film director, was contacted by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, who threatened to picket the filming site unless a $5,000 contribution was made to the Black Panther Party. Henry E. Peterson, acting director of the investigation against Newton, prominent, the Assistant Attorney General in the Watergate investigations. In light of this, we note, we note that Bernard now states that while he gave $5,000 to Newton, he does not feel that he was extorted in any way and that he did not wish to testify. In light of this, and considering that Max Julian, an actor in the film who was present when Bernard met Newton, cannot recall any discussion of money or picketing, there is insufficient evidence to warrant prosecution and further investigation is not warranted. Extortion was not, of course, the only crime federal law enforcement agencies tried to pin on the Black Panther Party. In his book, Agency of Fear, Epstein described how high-level intelligence officers in the Nixon administration used a narcotics cover to expand domestic counterintelligence operations. Under the aegis of a war on heroin, a series of new offices were set up. No, stop, Siri. No.
I didn't get that.
Jesus. Under the aegis of a war on heroin, a series of new offices were set up by by executive orders such as the Office of National Narcotics Intelligence. So new offices were set up by executive orders such as the Office of National Narcotics Intelligence. This is under the aegis of the war on heroin, which it was hoped would provide the president with investigative agencies having the potential to assume the functions of the plumbers on a far grander scale. According to, and this is Epstein in Agency of Fear, according to the White House scenario, these new investigative functions would be legitimized by the need to eradicate the evil of drug addiction. The Nixon administration's exploitation of the narcotics menace to justify expansion of the federal investigative agencies achieved extraordinary success. Between 1968 and 1974, the federal budget for enforcing narcotics laws rose from $3 million to more than $224 million, a 70-fold increase. And this in turn gave the president an opportunity to create a series of highly unorthodox federal agencies. The utility of a narcotics cover appears in numerous internal law enforcement documents concerning the BPP. Various agencies claim within their reports, in fact, to be investigating narcotics use by the Panther leaders, especially Huey Newton. When, for example, Newton and some close friends took a one-week Caribbean cruise for vacation, the FBI sent at least one clandestine agent who submitted the following report. An unidentified informant stated that his company had recently experienced a heavy increase in bookings aboard the Starward, the cruise ship taken by blacks, and he is suspicious that this increase is due in part to the availability of narcotics at Port-au-Prince and Port Antonio. He stated that his suspicions have been buttressed by the recent confiscation of several pieces of luggage filled with narcotics from a Starward passenger. Inasmuch as reliable sources have identified Newton as a user of cocaine, and as he is probably the user of other narcotics, we will alert customs personnel to be on the lookout for narcotics in the possession of Newton and any of his party upon their return to Miami. Not content merely to alert customs, the FBI noted that the information has been disseminated to the State Department and the CIA. Copies of attached being furnished to the Department, Internal Security, and General Crime sections, and the Secret Service. Indeed, in April 1973, the FBI requested that all San Francisco agents be aware of either the purchase or use of cocaine by Huey Newton. Any information obtained in this regard should be immediately furnished to both the OPD Oakland Police Department and appropriate federal narcotics agencies. 6 months later, the Bureau seemed less interested in Newton's possible use of cocaine than they were about narcotics dealers he might have been hitting up for contributions to community survival programs. Source reports from contacts with various and unidentified Negro dope dealers that the big-time dope dealers in the Berkeley and Oakland area are out to get Huey Newton. Source reports that Huey is apparently ripping off certain dealers, pimps, and whores for large amounts of money, and the talk is that they are going to get Huey. Source was instructed to determine some hard facts regarding these rumors and to report same immediately. The super agency approach to crushing dissent. By 1973, this process of employing the narcotics and crime covers reached its climax with the creation of a new intelligence super agency, the Drug Enforcement Agency. At the time of its formation, the DEA employed more than 4,000 agents and analysts, including some 53 former or detached CIA agents, and a dozen counterintelligence experts from the military or other intelligence agencies. The DEA had the authority to request wiretaps and no-knock warrants, and to submit targets to the Internal Revenue Service. With its contingent of former CIA and counterintelligence agents, it had the talent to enter residences surreptitiously, distribute black or misleading information, plant phony evidence, and conduct even more extreme clandestine assignments. The origin of the DEA and its intended purpose are explained by Epstein as follows. According to those familiar with the plan, G. Gordon Liddy proposed to detach agents and specialists who could be relied upon by the White House from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, the IRS, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division, and the Bureau of Customs. This new office would operate directly out of the Executive Office of the President of the United States. The beauty of the Liddy plan was its simplicity. It did not even need approval from Congress. The President could create such an office by executive decree, and all other agencies of the government to cooperate by supplying liaisons and agents. Congress would not even have to appropriate funds. According to those familiar with the Liddy plan, the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, which was located in John Mitchell's Department of Justice, could funnel monies via local police departments to finance these new strike forces. The new office would have wiretappers from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, customs agents with their unique search authority, IRS agents who could feed the names of suspects into the IRS's Target Selection Committee for grueling audit, and the CIA agents for the more extraordinary missions. In addition, since it would control grants from the LEAA, this new office could mobilize support from state and local police forces in areas in which it desired to operate. The most important feature of the Liddy plan, however, was that the White House agents would act under the cloak of combating the drug menace. Since public fears were being excited about this deadly threat to the children of American citizens and their property, few would oppose vigorous measures even if its agents were occasionally caught in such excesses as placing an unauthorized wiretap. On the contrary, if the dread of drugs could be maintained, the public, Congress, and the press would probably applaud such determined actions. Krogh and the White House strategists immediately saw the advantages to having the new office operate its agents under the emblem of a heroin crusade. And Liddy's option paper, much modified and formed to remove any embarrassing illegalities, was sent to the president with the recommendations of Krogh and Ehrlichman. Finally, in December of 1971, the president ordered Ehrlichman and Krogh to create the permanent White House-controlled investigative unit envisioned in the option paper drawn up by Liddy. The new unit was to also be known as the Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement. On January 28, 1972, the Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement, the permanent investigative force, which ostensibly would operate against narcotics traffickers, was officially created by an executive order of the president. Since there was virtually no precedent for an agency like the Office of Drug Abuse and Law Enforcement, Ambrose had to proceed step by step in assembling his strike forces. The first step was to appoint regional directors who would superintend and select the federal agents and local police on each strike force in each of the 33 target cities he selected. Appoint regional directors. The first step was to appoint regional directors who would superintend and select the federal agents and local police on each strike force in each of the 33 target cities he had selected. 50 other lawyers, many of whom Ambrose knew personally, were deployed in instantly created field offices of the new organization. 400 investigators were requisitioned from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs and the Bureau of Customs, and Ambrose requested more than 100 liaisons from the Internal Revenue Service, as well as specialists from other agencies of the government. This was all accomplished during the first 30 days of existence of this new office, in what Ambrose himself referred to as a monumental feat of organization. The new strike forces had little resemblance to more conventional law enforcement forces. These highly unorthodox units, which were being controlled from the White House through the president's special consultant, Miles Ambrose, included not only trained narcotics and customs officers, but also immigration and naturalization service officers, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms control agents, probation officers, state troopers, and local police officers. With the authority of court-authorized no-knock warrants and wiretaps, they could strike at will in any of the target cities and against virtually anyone selected as a target. By March of 1972, the strike forces had become operational. There was some resistance to Law Enforcement Assistance Administration officials to using the LEAA money to finance ODALE operations. They argued that Congress never intended for the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration grants to be used to bypass the appropriations process. So with White House assistance, the new office established a series of local organizations with names such as Research Associates. Whoa. They set this all up before Nixon left. Holy shit. The money was then channeled back to selected strike forces. Right. So with White House assistance, the new office established a series of local organizations with names such as Research Associates, through which grants could be made by the LEAA. The money was then channeled back to selected strike forces, with these organizations acting in effect as money conduits. The California conduit for these laundered forces was the Organized Crime and Criminal Intelligence Branch of the State Department of Justice, which had already been set up in 1970 by California Attorney General Avell Younger. A report circulated by the OCCIB in 1972 identified among its prime targets the Black Panther Party. The Organized Crime and Criminal Intelligence Branch of the California Research Associate. Okay, so via Research Associates into organism. FBI declares war on the Panthers. COINTELPRO. Within 1 year of the formation of the party, the FBI formed a special counterintelligence program dubbed COINTELPRO. The purpose of this program was, in the FBI's own words, to export, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of the black nationalists. A specific purpose of COINTELPRO was to prevent the rise of a messiah, a charismatic black leader who might unify and electrify the people. Martin Luther King Jr. was named as a potential messiah in the FBI's own secret memorandum establishing COINTELPRO. But after the assassination of King in 1968, the FBI shifted its focus to the party and its leadership, particularly Huey P. Newton. J. Edgar Hoover, then director of the FBI, stated publicly that the party constituted the greatest threat to the internal security of the country of any organization. Of the 295 documented actions taken by COINTELPRO alone to disrupt black nationalist groups, 233, or 79%, were specifically directed toward destruction of the party. Over $100 million of taxpayers' money was expended for the COINTELPRO program. Over $7 million of it was allocated for 1976 alone to pay off informants and provocateurs. Twice the amount allocated in the same period by the FBI to pay organized crime informants. Indeed, while COINTELPRO ostensibly targeted 5 domestic organizations which the Bureau dubbed the Communist Party, the Social Workers' Party, white hate groups, black nationalist hate groups, i.e. the Panthers, and the New Left, it was blacks, and the Panthers in particular, who received the brunt of the damage. As the Senate Select Committee to Study Governmental Operations found, the white hate COINTELPRO also used comparatively few techniques which carried a risk of serious physical, emotional, or economic damage to the targets, while the black nationalist COINTELPRO used such techniques extensively. The vast arsenal of techniques employed by the Bureau against the Black Panther Party were tried and tested over the years in foreign espionage. As William C. Sullivan, former assistant to the director, stated, "This is a rough, dirty, tough business and dangerous. It was dangerous at times. No holds were barred. We have used these techniques against Soviet agents. They have used them against us. The same methods were brought home against any organization against which we were targeted. We did not differentiate. This is a rough, tough business." Specifically, the FBI engaged in or encouraged a variety of actions intended to cause, and in fact causing, deaths of Black Panther members, loss of membership and community support, draining of revenues from the party, false arrests of members and supporters, and defamatory discrediting of constructive party programs and leaders. What follows is an illustrative highlighting of some of these unlawful actions taken by the Bureau against the Black Panther Party.